A mother German shepherd stood in the middle of a dusty Idaho road, refusing to move. Behind her, two tiny puppies trembled in the dry grass, too weak to follow, too young to understand why their mother kept looking toward the abandoned fields. A 66-year-old retired Navy SEAL stopped his truck, thinking he had found 3 strays who only needed food, warmth, and a safe place to sleep. But that night, while the puppies rested by the fire, the mother dog would not close her eyes. She kept staring north. The next morning, she led him across the field, toward a rusted pickup truck hidden in the tall grass. Why did she remember that truck? Who had left it there? And what was waiting inside? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late spring had come softly to Willow Creek, Idaho, though the evening still carried a thin chill from the hills. The sky was low and golden, stretched over the dry fields like an old blanket someone had forgotten to fold. Dust rested on the fence posts. Cottonwood leaves trembled beside the narrow road. Far beyond the last row of farmhouses, the land opened into quiet pasture, abandoned sheds and long grass that moved even when there was almost no wind. Elias Grant drove home with one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting near a paper sack of groceries on the passenger seat. He was 66 years old, a retired Navy SEAL with a broad frame that age had not managed to shrink, only slow down. His silver-gray hair was cut short, his beard neatly trimmed along a square jaw that looked as if it had been carved by weather and stubbornness. Deep lines marked the corners of his blue-gray eyes, not from laughter alone, though laughter had once lived there. Most people in Willow Creek called him polite, reliable, and difficult to reach. He would fix a broken gate for a neighbor, stack firewood without being asked, and disappear before anyone could invite him inside for coffee. That was the arrangement he preferred. Coffee led to conversation. Conversation led to questions. Questions had a way of opening doors in a man that he had spent years learning how to keep shut. Elias lived alone on the edge of town in a small wooden house with a red tin roof and a porch that faced the northern fields. After his wife died, the house had become too quiet, then familiar in its quietness, then almost sacred. There was one chair at the kitchen table, one mug beside the sink, one pair of boots by the door. Nothing argued with him, nothing needed him, nothing looked at him with eyes full of trust. Which was exactly how he thought he wanted it. He was thinking about whether canned soup counted as dinner if a man ate it cold over the sink, when something stepped into the road ahead. Elias pressed the brake. A German shepherd mother stood in the middle of the dirt road. She was about 5 years old, lean beneath a sable coat streaked with dust, her ribs faintly visible beneath thick fur. Her ears were high and alert, her amber eyes fixed on the truck with a steadiness that made Elias sit straighter. She did not bark. She did not run. She simply stood there, blocking the road like a small four-legged judge, deciding whether the man behind the windshield deserved to pass. "Ma'am?" Elias muttered, because after enough years alone, a man either talked to animals or started arguing with kitchen appliances. That is a very poor place to hold a meeting. The dog did not move. Then Elias saw them. Behind her, tucked near the edge of the grass, were 2 German shepherd puppies, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. One was curled tight, trembling so hard its small body seemed to pulse against the dirt. The other had lifted its head, but could barely keep it up. Both had soft black and tan coats dulled by dust, paws too large for their thin legs, and the helpless round faces of creatures born into a world that had not yet explained itself. Elias turned off the engine. The silence arrived all at once. No radio, no tires over gravel, only the ticking of the cooling engine and a meadowlark calling somewhere beyond the fence. Elias sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He had known danger in many forms. He had seen men pretend not to be afraid. He had seen fear dressed as anger, pride, even jokes. But this was something different. The mother dog was not begging, she was measuring him. He opened the truck door slowly. The mother dog lowered her head but held her ground. Her body was thin, but there was iron in the way she stood between him and the puppies. Elias recognized that posture. Protection could make a starving creature look like a king guarding a ruined kingdom. "Easy," he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "I'm not here to hurt them." The weaker puppy made a tiny sound, a broken little whine that seemed too small for the open fields. The mother dog flicked one ear toward it, but her eyes stayed on Elias. That was what moved him most. Not the hunger, not the dust, the discipline. She wanted to turn back to her baby, but she would not look away from the stranger until she knew what kind of man he was. Elias knelt, slowly enough for his knees to complain and for his pride to pretend it had not heard. He held out one hand, palm open. The mother dog leaned forward, sniffed him once, then again. Her nose was dry, her breath was warm and uneven. For a few seconds, the whole world seemed to wait on the judgment of that tired animal. At last, she stepped aside. It was not surrender, Elias knew that. It was permission. He lifted the first puppy gently. The small body was light, too light, all fur and bones and shivering life. The puppy tucked its nose against his sleeve. The second puppy gave a weak protest when Elias picked it up, a squeak of outrage so dramatic that Elias almost smiled. "Well," he whispered, carrying them toward the truck, "at least one of you still has opinions." He placed them on an old wool blanket behind the seat. The stronger puppy immediately tried to crawl under the weaker one, as if warmth could be borrowed by force. Elias pulled another blanket from the storage box and tucked it around them. When he turned back, the mother dog was still standing in the road. "Come on," he said. "You too." She did not come. Instead, she looked north. Elias followed her gaze. Beyond the road lay a wide field, a broken line of fence and a stretch of tall grass that rolled toward an abandoned property, half hidden by cottonwoods. The land was empty as far as he could tell. No movement, no person, no sound but the wind combing through the weeds. The mother dog stared toward it with a kind of ache that Elias did not understand. Then one of the puppies whimpered from inside the truck. The sound changed her. The faraway look vanished. She turned, padded to the open door, and hesitated only once before jumping in. She climbed beside the puppies and lowered herself around them, curling her body into a wall of warmth. Her eyes, however, remained open. Even as Elias closed the door and started the engine, she watched the northern field through the dusty glass. On the drive home, Elias told himself this was simple. 3 strays, food, water, a warm night. Tomorrow he would call someone in town, maybe the small animal rescue near the feed store. He was not adopting a family of dogs. He was not rearranging his life because a shepherd with haunted eyes had held a meeting in the road. The stronger puppy sneezed. Elias glanced in the rearview mirror. That better not be a vote. By the time he reached his house, the last light had faded from gold to blue. He carried the puppies inside first. His kitchen, which had spent years behaving like a quiet chapel to one man's loneliness, immediately became a field hospital, nursery, and minor circus. He spread blankets by the fireplace, warmed water, found a shallow bowl, and opened a can of chicken he had bought for himself. The puppies ate clumsily, stepping in the food twice and wearing nearly as much as they swallowed. The mother dog waited until they were finished before she ate. Even then, she took only a little. She drank, checked each puppy with her nose, then lay down beside them. Elias stood nearby, watching the firelight move across her coat. Something in his chest tightened, old and unwelcome. He remembered his wife sitting in that same room years ago, wrapped in a blue shawl, pretending she was not tired so he would not worry. He remembered being present and absent at once, a man trained to survive hard things but not to sit helplessly beside someone he loved. Some guilt did not shout. Some guilt became furniture. You learned to walk around it in the dark. One puppy rolled onto its back, paws twitching in sleep. The other pressed its face into the mother dog's fur and finally stopped trembling. Elias should have felt relieved, but the mother dog did not sleep. She lay with her head raised, eyes fixed on the front door. The house settled around them. The fire cracked softly. Outside, night gathered over the fields. Later, when the clock above the stove read 10:17, the mother dog rose without a sound. She stepped over the sleeping puppies, walked to the door, and stood there, staring into the darkness beyond the porch. Elias watched from the kitchen. North. Always north. He did not know it yet, but something old had just found its way to his doorstep. Morning came, pale and quiet over Willow Creek, Idaho, with a thin veil of mist resting low across the northern fields. The late spring sun had not yet grown warm enough to burn the dampness from the grass, and the cottonwood trees beyond Elias Grant's porch stirred with the slow patience of old witnesses. His small wooden house sat at the edge of town, half shadowed by fence posts and open land, the kind of place where silence could either heal a man or teach him to disappear inside it. For 3 days, Elias cared for the German shepherd mother and her 2 puppies, as if he were only doing a temporary job. He told himself that each morning while warming water, rinsing bowls, and laying clean towels beside the fireplace. Temporary. That was a useful word. It let a lonely man perform tenderness, without admitting he had begun to need it. Elias was 66, broad-shouldered and still powerfully built beneath the slow stiffness of age. His silver-gray hair was clipped close, his beard trimmed neat along a hard, square jaw. His eyes, blue-gray and deeply lined, often carried the guarded look of someone who had spent years studying exits. Around people he was polite but difficult to hold. He answered questions without offering extra pieces of himself. He could repair a broken fence, carry a heavy box, or clear a fallen branch from a neighbor's road, then vanish before gratitude had time to become conversation. Loss had not made him cruel. It had made him careful. There was a difference, though most people did not stay long enough to notice. The puppies were changing quickly. The stronger one, a round-bellied German shepherd pup with clumsy paws and a black muzzle too serious for its tiny face, discovered movement as if it were a personal victory. It dragged one of Elias's wool socks beneath the kitchen table and guarded it with great dignity, growling whenever Elias bent down to retrieve it. The sock had done nothing wrong, but the puppy treated it like a captured outlaw. The weaker puppy remained smaller and quieter, with soft black and tan fur, narrow shoulders, and eyes that still looked cloudy with exhaustion. Yet even that little one had begun lifting its head when Elias entered the room. It had developed a habit of blinking at him slowly, as if deciding whether the old man was real or simply another warm object placed near the fire. Once, when steam rose from the kettle on the stove, the quiet puppy startled awake and gave 3 sharp barks, each one more offended than the last. Elias looked at the kettle, then at the puppy. "I served with men less alert than you." The puppy sneezed into the blanket. It was the first time Elias laughed in his kitchen without feeling guilty afterward. The sound surprised him. It came out rusty, unused, and nearly embarrassed to be heard. For a moment, the room seemed to widen around it. He noticed how empty the house had been before the dogs arrived, not because the silence vanished, but because now there was something to compare it to. Paws scratching on wood, bowls sliding across the floor, tiny teeth worrying the edge of a towel, soft breathing near the hearth. But the mother dog did not join the little disorder. She was a German shepherd of about 5 years, sable-coated and lean, with dust still caught deep in the darker fur along her back. Her amber eyes were intelligent and watchful, too steady to be called wild and too sorrowful to be called tame. She accepted food from Elias's hand, but only after her puppies had eaten. She drank, but not deeply. She slept, but never fully. Even stretched beside the fire, her ears remained tuned toward the front door. At first, Elias thought it was ordinary caution. A stray mother did not simply forget hunger, fear, or the memory of being unwelcome. But by the third day, he knew it was something else. She was not watching the house. She was watching beyond it. Several times each day, the mother dog rose from the blankets and walked to the front door. She did not scratch to be let out for long. She did not whine for attention. She simply stood there, head lifted, eyes fixed toward the northern fields. Sometimes she pressed her nose to the crack beneath the door and breathed in slowly, as though the wind carried a message no human ear could translate. If a truck passed on the distant county road, she stiffened. If the cottonwoods creaked, she turned her head. If one of the puppies cried, she hurried back immediately, touched both with her nose, then returned again to the same place. Elias began to keep notes. He found an old brown notebook in the drawer beneath the phone, the same drawer where he kept rubber bands, dead batteries, and instruction manuals for appliances he no longer owned. On the first page he wrote, "Mother dog behavior." Then he paused, frowned at the words, and added, "Not ordinary restlessness." He wrote down the times she approached the door. Early morning, midday, dusk, late evening. Always the same direction, north. He noted the way her breathing changed when the wind came across the field. He marked how she ignored the road to town but reacted to the open pasture beyond the broken fence line. Old training returned to him, not as violence, but as attention, pattern, repetition, deviation. A living creature was trying to communicate, and Elias knew better than to dismiss silence just because it lacked human language. Still, the notebook unsettled him. There was something uncomfortable about being needed by an animal who did not ask for comfort. The puppies needed warmth, milk, scraps of chicken, and a place to tumble without falling into the wood box. That kind of need was simple. The mother dog's need was different. It had direction, purpose, memory. And memory was the one territory Elias preferred not to patrol. On the fourth afternoon, the sky turned a clean, pale blue after a brief morning rain. The yard smelled of wet dust and grass. Elias had just finished washing 2 bowls when he heard the soft click of claws on the floorboards. The mother dog was at the door again. Behind her, the stronger puppy slept with Elias's stolen sock tucked under one paw. The weaker one lay curled near the warm bricks of the hearth, breathing evenly for the first time since arriving. The mother dog looked back at Elias, not at the room, not at the puppies, at him. That look was different from the one on the road. There was no testing in it now, no warning. It was an invitation, or perhaps a command delivered with better manners than most commanders Elias had known. He dried his hands slowly. "No," he said, though not firmly enough to convince either of them. The mother dog turned to the door and waited. Elias looked around his quiet house, at the puppies sleeping in the firelight, at the single chair by the table, at the notebook lying open with its strange little map of repeated hours. A man could ignore many things and call it peace. He had done that for years. But he could not ignore a mother who had finally trusted him enough to ask for something more. He opened the door. The mother dog stepped onto the porch, moved down into the yard, then trotted several yards toward the field. She stopped at the edge of the grass and turned back. She did not run away. She did not vanish. She waited. Elias stood in the doorway, feeling the old weight of hesitation settle across his shoulders. Then he reached for his coat and took the flashlight from the shelf beside the door. "All right, little commander," he said quietly. "Lead the way. But if this is just to show me where you buried a bone, I'm going to be deeply disappointed." The mother dog stared at him for one breath longer, then turned north. The afternoon had begun to fade over Willow Creek, Idaho, leaving the fields washed in a copper-colored light. A cool wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of damp soil from the morning rain and the faint sweetness of cottonwood leaves. Elias Grant stood on his porch with his coat half-buttoned, a flashlight in one hand, watching the German shepherd mother wait at the edge of the yard. She did not bark. She did not wag her tail. She simply faced north, still as a carved guardian, and looked back only once to make sure he was following. Inside the house, the two puppies slept near the fireplace. The stronger one had finally abandoned Elias's stolen sock and was now sprawled belly up like a tiny soldier who had lost a battle against warmth. The weaker puppy slept curled beside it, breathing softly, its small body no longer shaking. Elias had checked the latch twice before leaving. He had filled a bowl with water, placed the blankets closer to the bricks, and told himself this would only take a few minutes. That was another useful lie, and Elias had become an expert in those. A man alone learns to rename worry as caution, loneliness as independence, and fear as good sense. The mother dog moved first, slipping through the yard and into the field beyond the broken rail fence. Her sable coat blended with the tall grass, but her head stayed lifted, her ears sharp against the evening sky. Elias followed at a slower pace. At 66, his body still held the memory of strength, but memory was not the same as ease. His knees disliked uneven ground. His right shoulder ached when the wind turned cold. His hands, large and scarred from old work and older wars, tightened around the flashlight, though it was not yet dark enough to need it. He had crossed dangerous terrain before, mountains, desert roads, narrow streets where every window looked like a question. But this field unsettled him in a quieter way. There were no enemies here, no urgent radio calls, no orders. Only a dog walking with purpose, and a man following because something in him had not fully died, no matter how long he had tried to bury it. The mother dog reached the broken fence line and slipped beneath it. Elias stopped, studying the gap. One board had collapsed years ago, leaving a jagged opening wide enough for a determined animal, and just wide enough for an old man willing to lose some dignity. He crouched, ducked through, caught his coat on a splinter, and muttered a word he would not have used in church. If there had been an audience, he would have pretended the fence started it. Beyond the fence, the land changed. The grass grew taller, wilder, thick around the remains of an old driveway nearly swallowed by weeds. A rusted mailbox leaned at an angle near the entrance, its door hanging open like a mouth too tired to speak. The numbers on its side had faded to pale ghosts. No house stood nearby, only the suggestion that one had once belonged there. A rectangle of foundation stones, a collapsed pump shed, a few old lilac bushes fighting bravely against neglect. The mother dog did not hesitate. She led Elias around the foundation and toward a cluster of cottonwoods at the far end of the property. The trees stood close together, their trunks pale in the fading light, their leaves trembling above a patch of tall grass that grew thicker than the rest. Elias saw the shape only when the dog stopped. An old pickup truck sat half hidden among the weeds. It had once been blue, maybe sky blue, maybe the soft, faded blue of an enamel coffee pot. Now most of its body was rust. The hood was mottled brown and orange. One headlight was missing, the other clouded white. The tires had collapsed into the dirt, and grass rose so high around the doors that the truck looked less parked than slowly claimed by the earth. A long crack ran across the windshield. The driver's side mirror hung crooked, trembling slightly in the wind. Elias stepped closer. On the driver's door, under scratches, dirt, and years of weather, faint white letters remained. He brushed at them with the sleeve of his coat until the words became clearer. Mabel's Kitchen Route. Elias frowned. The name stirred nothing at first, only a vague sense that he had heard it in town, maybe at the feed store, maybe spoken by the woman at the post office who knew every sorrow within 20 miles and filed them alphabetically in her head. But the phrase itself made the place feel less abandoned. Kitchen Route. Not a business exactly, not a delivery company, something smaller, more personal. A door-to-door kindness, maybe. Or an old joke painted on a truck by someone with too much paint and not enough concern for appearances. The mother dog approached the truck as if returning to a chapel. Her entire body changed. The tension in her back softened, but not into comfort. It became grief. She lowered her nose to the driver's side door and breathed against the rusted metal. Then she made a sound Elias had not heard from her before, a low, trembling whine that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than hunger or fear. She pressed her muzzle to the seam of the door, then pawed gently at the lower edge. Elias felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. He had seen men stand like that before old photographs, before empty beds, before folded flags. Humans liked to believe animals lived only in the present because it made humans' sorrow feel more advanced. But watching that mother dog touch the truck, Elias was not so sure. Maybe memory did not require language. Maybe love left a scent where it had once rested. Maybe grief, in its oldest form, was simply returning to the last place something good had been. "Who brought you here?" he whispered. The dog looked at him, then scratched again at the bottom of the door. Elias tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was. Old things had a way of guarding themselves after everyone else had stopped caring. He shone the flashlight through the cracked window, angling the beam past dust, dead leaves, and a spider web stretched from the steering wheel to the dashboard. The interior smelled stale even from outside, a mixture of old fabric, dry rot, and metal baked by seasons. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay a faded blanket. It was brown wool with a red stripe along one edge, folded unevenly as if someone had once used it often and put it away in a hurry. On the floorboard were several empty cans of dog food, their labels peeled and sun-bleached. Beneath the driver's seat, half swallowed by shadow, Elias saw the corner of a small metal box. He shifted the beam. The box was old, rectangular, and dark green, the kind of container that might have held fishing lures, recipes, or bills someone could not bear to throw away. It was wedged deep beneath the seat, just out of reach. Elias leaned closer to the window, squinting. Something about it troubled him. Not because it looked dangerous, because it looked kept. There was a difference between trash and something hidden badly by time. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, and for a moment the leaves sounded like whispered conversation. Elias stepped back from the truck. The field was getting darker. The puppies were alone in the house. The door was locked. Whatever this was, it could wait until morning. "We're done for tonight," he said. The mother dog turned sharply. Elias started back toward the broken fence, but she moved in front of him and blocked his path. Her body was thin, her paws dusty, her eyes bright in the low light. She did not growl, she did not threaten. She simply stood there, the same way she had stood in the dirt road days earlier, asking him again to decide what kind of man he was. Elias looked past her at the rusted pickup, at the faint words on the door, at the shadowed metal box beneath the seat. Then he looked down at the mother who had trusted him with her puppies, but would not let him abandon this place. For the first time in years, Elias felt that silence was not giving him permission to leave. It was asking him to listen. Morning settled over Willow Creek with a thin silver light, cool enough to fog the windows of Elias Grant's truck as he drove into town. The northern fields lay behind him, quiet and stubborn, and somewhere beyond them the rusted pickup waited among the cottonwoods like an old secret refusing to rot properly. Elias had slept badly. He had returned home the night before with the German shepherd mother walking close at his side, not satisfied, not defeated, only patient in that unnerving way animals could be patient when humans were being slow. The puppies had still been asleep by the fireplace when he came in, the stronger one wrapped around his stolen sock, the weaker one tucked beneath the edge of the blanket. The mother dog had checked them both, then looked at Elias as if the matter was not closed. He knew that look. He had seen it on commanders, doctors, and once on his wife when he claimed he was fine while standing in the kitchen with a bleeding hand wrapped in a dish towel. By sunrise, Elias had decided to ask questions. He disliked asking questions in town because questions invited questions back, and Willow Creek was small enough that a man could not buy nails without someone remembering what size grief he wore. Still, the words on the pickup door had stayed in his mind. Mabel's Kitchen Route. The first place he stopped was Harlow's Market, a narrow brick building with faded green awnings, where the floorboards creaked like they were personally offended by every customer. Behind the counter stood Ruth Bell, a woman in her early 70s with a round face, soft brown skin, silver hair pinned in a loose knot, and eyes that missed very little. Ruth had run the market with her late husband for nearly 40 years, and widowhood had not made her bitter. It had made her precise. She knew who bought soup because they liked it, and who bought soup because chewing had become work. When Elias stepped inside, she looked over the top of her glasses and said, "Elias Grant, you're in town before noon. Either something broke or something found you." Elias removed his cap. "I found an old pickup north of my place. Blue, mostly rust now. Had words painted on the door." Ruth's expression changed before he finished. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition, followed by a small sadness she tried to tuck away quickly. "Mabel's truck." "Mabel who?" "Mabel Hargrove." Ruth leaned both hands on the counter. "You didn't know her?" Elias shook his head. Ruth gave a soft breath that was almost a laugh. "That sounds like Mabel. Half the town knew her name, and the other half ate because of her without knowing it." She told him Mabel Hargrove had been a school cafeteria cook for 32 years, a short, sturdy woman with pale, freckled skin, sharp gray eyes, and white hair usually trapped beneath a scarf that never matched anything else she wore. Mabel had a voice like a wooden spoon striking the edge of a pot, and a heart she disguised with complaints. She hated speeches, hated photographs, and hated being called generous. If anyone praised her, she would snort and say charity was just common sense with better shoes. After retiring, Mabel had used that old pickup to carry food, medicine, firewood, and handwritten notes to people who lived alone outside town. "She called it her kitchen route," Ruth said. "Wouldn't let us call it a program. Said programs required clipboards, and clipboards make people lie." Elias listened without interrupting. That was easier than speaking. Ruth went on. For old Mr. Hanley, whose teeth hurt too badly for crusty bread, Mabel brought soft soup and applesauce. For Mrs. Vega, who forgot her prescriptions when her sons were out of state, Mabel left reminders written in block letters. For anyone low on firewood, bundles appeared by the porch before cold nights. Sometimes she sat with people for tea, even when the tea was dreadful. Ruth smiled faintly. Mabel once said Ethel Crane made tea strong enough to make a mule question its life choices, but she drank 2 cups because Ethel needed company more than she needed honesty. Elias almost smiled, then did not. Something inside him had begun to shift, and shifting things hurt when they had been stuck too long. "She's gone?" he asked. Ruth nodded. 3 months now. Heart gave out in her garden. She was 74. Went quick, thank the Lord. Though she would have complained, the Lord picked an inconvenient hour. The market seemed quieter after that. Elias looked toward the window where sunlight lay across sacks of flour and dog food. He thought of the empty cans in the pickup, the blanket, the mother dog pressing her nose to the door seam as if greeting someone who should have been there. "Was there a dog?" he asked. Ruth tilted her head. "A stray shepherd came around last year. Pregnant, maybe. Mabel fed her when she could. Said the dog had better manners than most town council members." Elias felt the sentence land in him with more weight than it should have. He pictured the mother dog in his kitchen, ribs showing, eyes fixed north. Not wild. Remembering. Before he left, Ruth said, "Mabel went by your place too, Elias." He turned back slowly. "My place?" Ruth's voice softened. "After Grace passed."
Grace, his wife's name, entered the room like a candle lit in a closed church. Elias had not heard it spoken by another person in weeks. His wife had been slender and dark-haired, with gentle hands, a dry wit, and a way of seeing through him that had once comforted him and later terrified him. Illness had made her body fragile, but not her spirit. Elias had been beside her in those last months, technically. He had cooked badly, driven her to appointments, folded blankets, lifted her carefully from chairs. But he had often hidden inside tasks because tasks did not ask him to say what he felt. After she died, he had mistaken duty for love and silence for endurance. Ruth continued carefully now. Those bread bags on your porch? The soup in jars? The firewood stacked by the back steps that first winter? That was Mabel, most likely. She never told people when she helped, said gratitude made folks uncomfortable, and she had enough uncomfortable chairs in her life. Elias stood very still. He remembered those jars. He remembered opening the door and finding food still warm, then feeling irritated because kindness had crossed the threshold he had tried to defend. He had eaten the soup anyway. He had never asked who made it. He had never said thank you. Pain rose in him, not sharp but deep, the ache of discovering he had been loved in a language he had refused to learn. "Who owns the land now?" he asked. Ruth's face tightened. "Man named Cal Mercer bought it with 2 other parcels. Runs Mercer Salvage outside town." Cal Mercer was at the feed store loading chain into a dented white van when Elias found him. He was a narrow man in his late 50s, with sun-browned skin, a pointed chin, thinning sandy hair, and a restless manner that made every conversation feel like it was costing him money. He was not cruel, only practical in the blunt way of men who measured old things by weight. "Truck's coming out this week," Cal said after Elias asked. "Scrapyard'll take it. Land needs clearing. There may be something inside. Then get it fast." Cal shrugged. "Old truck ain't a shrine." Elias said nothing, but the words stayed with him all the way home. Old truck ain't a shrine. Maybe not. But some things became holy not because they were beautiful, but because someone had used them to carry mercy. By the time he reached his house, the afternoon had dimmed. The 2 puppies were asleep near the fire, one snoring softly, the other twitching its paws in a dream. The mother dog lay between them and the front door like a sentry, guarding both the living and the unfinished dead. When Elias stepped inside, she lifted her head. She did not bark, she did not plead. She only looked at him with those amber eyes, patient and severe, as if waiting for the old soldier to understand that being rescued was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of his assignment. By late afternoon, the light over Willow Creek had turned warm and slanted, brushing the fields with gold while shadows gathered beneath the cottonwoods. Elias Grant stood in his kitchen with his coat already on, looking at the German shepherd mother as she watched him from beside the front door. The 2 puppies were awake now, clumsy and restless after a long nap. The stronger one had dragged Elias's sock into the corner again and was chewing it with the solemn concentration of a carpenter building a church. The weaker one sat close to its mother's front legs, still thin and uncertain, but with brighter eyes than it had carried on the road. Elias had warmed food for them, checked the water bowl, and set a low lamp near the hearth. Every practical thing had been handled. That left only the impractical thing, following a stray dog back to a rusted pickup truck before a salvage man hauled it away. He did not like the urgency in his own chest. For years, urgency had belonged to other people's emergencies. A fallen tree, a flooded culvert, a neighbor with a dead battery. Those problems had shape and weight. They could be lifted, fixed, replaced. This was different. This was an old truck, a dead woman's kindness, and a mother dog who seemed to remember more faithfully than half the town. Elias had spent years believing memory was a room one entered alone. Now, standing in his kitchen with a flashlight in his hand, he wondered if memory was sometimes a trail, and if some creatures were brave enough to walk it twice. The mother dog rose the moment he opened the door. "Don't look so pleased,"
Elias said quietly. "I'm still calling this a bad idea." She stepped onto the porch, glanced toward the puppies, then moved down into the yard. Elias had arranged the fire screen, latched the back door, and placed the puppies' blankets in a circle near the hearth. He told himself they would be safe for a short while. The stronger puppy barked once from inside, perhaps objecting to being excluded from whatever secret adult meeting was taking place. Elias pointed toward the window. "You're in charge of the sock. That's enough responsibility for one evening." The mother dog led him north with more confidence than before. She did not wander. She did not stop to sniff rabbit tracks or investigate the fence posts. Her path crossed the field, slipped through the broken rail fence, and followed the half-buried driveway toward the abandoned property. Elias noticed things he had missed the first time. The collapsed stone foundation shaped like a memory of a house, the lilac bushes gone wild near where a porch might have stood, the rusted mailbox leaning beside the drive. The whole place seemed less empty now that he knew someone's name belongs to it. Mabel. A woman with soup jars, firewood bundles, and a habit of helping people without giving them a chance to refuse. The pickup waited beneath the cottonwoods, dull blue and rust red, its cracked windshield catching a thin strip of sunset. The words on the door, "Mabel's Kitchen Route," looked both foolish and noble in the fading light. Elias stood before it a moment longer than necessary. He thought of Cal Mercer's saying it was not a shrine. Maybe Cal was right. Maybe it was only metal, rubber, ruined upholstery, and one stubborn door lock. But Elias had learned in war and in marriage that ordinary objects could become vessels. A coffee mug, a shawl, a grocery list in familiar handwriting. A truck that once carried warm soup to people too proud or too tired to ask for help. The mother dog did not go to the driver's door this time. Instead, she jumped into the truck bed. The movement surprised Elias. She landed lightly despite her thin body, then lowered her nose to the warped wooden boards lining the bed. Leaves and dirt had collected in the corners. Rust flaked from the wheel wells. A cracked plastic crate lay on its side near the cab. The dog ignored all of it. She sniffed along one board near the left side, then began to paw at it. "Careful," Elias said. She scraped again, not frantic but insistent. Elias climbed onto the rear bumper with the slow displeasure of a man whose knees had filed several complaints already. The board she scratched at was darker than the others, softened by rot where rain had pooled for years. He pressed one boot against it. It shifted slightly. Beneath the scent of wet wood and rust came another smell, faint but distinct. Old wool, dry dust, and something sweet, maybe lavender or soap long faded. The dog lowered her head and whined. Elias crouched and worked his fingers under the edge of the board. It resisted at first, then lifted with a crack that echoed through the quiet property. He paused, listening. Nothing answered but wind in the cottonwoods. Under the board was a narrow space between the bed frame and the old liner. Tucked inside was a rolled blanket, brown wool with a red stripe along the edge. The same pattern he had glimpsed through the truck window, or perhaps its twin. It had been wrapped tight and pushed into the hollow as if someone had hidden it quickly but carefully. Elias pulled it free. Dust rose around his hands. The mother dog pressed her nose against the blanket. Her body softened in a way that made Elias look away for a second. It felt too private, like watching someone find the coat of a person they had loved. She breathed in once, then again, eyes half closed. Whatever lived in that old wool, she knew it. Food, shelter, safety. A woman's hands. To Elias, it was only a blanket. To her, it was a map back to mercy. He unrolled it slowly. A key fell into his palm. It was small, badly rusted, and tied to a loop of faded red string. For a moment Elias simply stared at it. No grand revelation came with it. No thunder broke over the hills. A key was just a key, ugly and cold in an old man's hand. Yet his pulse changed. The mother dog had not let him here because she understood locks, papers, or secrets. She had let him because scent had kept a road open when human memory had let it grow over. She remembered the blanket. The blanket had hidden the key, and the key belonged to the truck. "You didn't know," Elias murmured. "You just remembered where kindness smelled strongest." The words affected him more than he expected. He thought of the soup jars on his porch after Grace died. He had taken them inside without opening the door to the world that sent them. He had received love as if it were weather, unasked for, inconvenient, something to endure until it passed. But love had not passed. It had waited in a rotting truck bed, under a ruined board, guarded by a mother who could not read a single word, and still understood more than he did. The key fit the driver's door after 3 tries, and one muttered insult directed at the entire history of rust. The lock gave with a reluctant click. The mother dog stood beside him on the ground, trembling now. Elias opened the door. The smell that came out was stale and old, but not foul. Dust, metal, sun-baked vinyl, dried grass, and the ghost of something domestic. He reached beneath the driver's seat, fingers searching past grit and a dropped button, until they closed around the metal box he had seen the night before. It was heavier than he expected. He set it on the hood, wiped away dust with his sleeve, and opened the latch. There was no money inside, no weapon. No treasure fit for dramatic men with dramatic music. Only a stack of small notebooks tied with twine. Several faded photographs. A veterinary receipt folded twice, and one cream-colored envelope, yellowed at the edges, with handwriting that was strong, slanted, and unmistakably human. Elias lifted it carefully. On the front, someone had written, "For whoever Juniper trusts." He looked down at the German Shepherd mother. The dog looked back, amber eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "Juniper," Elias said softly. The name seemed to settle over her like something returned. Night had settled fully over Willow Creek by the time Elias Grant carried the metal box into his kitchen. Outside, the northern fields had disappeared into darkness, leaving only the porch light glowing against the window glass and the faint shapes of cottonwoods beyond the yard. The house smelled of warm bricks, puppy breath, old wood, and the dust that had followed him back from the rusted pickup. Elias set the box on the kitchen table as if it were something fragile, though it was only dented metal with chipped green paint and a stubborn latch. Juniper stood beside him, the sable-coated German Shepherd mother finally named by a dead woman's handwriting. Her amber eyes watched the box, then watched Elias, calm but unblinking. The 2 puppies slept near the fireplace, one sprawled across Elias's sock like a tiny thief guarding treasure. The other tucked beneath the mother's blanket with its nose barely showing. For the first time since the dogs had entered his life, Elias felt the house holding its breath. He sat down slowly. His broad shoulders, still strong beneath age and old pain, seemed heavier in the lamplight. The lines around his blue-gray eyes deepened as he untied the stack of notebooks with hands that had once been steady under fire and now trembled at the edge of paper. It was a strange thing, he thought, how a man could face danger without flinching and still feel afraid of a stranger's handwriting. Bullets were honest. They came fast, did harm, and left evidence. Kindness was harder. Kindness could arrive quietly, sit on your porch in a soup jar, and years later make you realize you had been less alone than you believed. The first notebook had a red cover, softened at the corners. Inside, Mabel Hargrove had written in strong, slanted letters that leaned forward, as if even her handwriting disliked wasting time. The pages were not sentimental. They were practical, sometimes funny, and often more tender because they tried not to be. Mabel had listed names, roads, food preferences, medicine reminders, small fears, and quiet humiliations people carried when age made independence more expensive than pride. Elias read the first page. Della Whitcomb, Mill Road, 82. Tall, thin, white hair worn in a braid. Proud posture even when her hip hurts. Says she likes being alone but keeps 2 cups by the stove. Needs soft bread, no pepper, and someone to check the porch step before rain. Elias paused over the detail about the 2 cups. It was the kind of thing no official form would ever record, yet it said almost everything. The next entry named Norman Pike, a retired mechanic in his late 70s who lived behind the old grain elevator. Mabel described him as short, barrel-chested, brown-skinned from years in the sun, with thick white eyebrows and hands permanently stained by grease. Norman pretended to hate soup, according to the note, but returned every clean jar with a peppermint inside. Under his name, Mabel had written, "Lies about having enough firewood. Check shed, not mouth." Elias turned the page. Edith Crane, 79, widow. Sharp chin, soft voice, keeps curtains open until midnight because darkness makes the hallway too long. Likes tea strong enough to frighten livestock. Bring biscuits anyway. Despite himself, Elias gave a small breath of laughter. It disappeared almost at once. The notebook was funny in the way old churches could be funny when a hymn book had a child's drawing tucked inside it. Every line carried life. Every line carried someone Mabel had refused to let vanish behind a closed door. There were more. A man who needed his pill bottles lined up by day because his fingers shook. A woman whose son called from Arizona every Sunday but never remembered she could not hear well on the phone. A former school bus driver who still woke before dawn and sat in his coat waiting for a route that no longer existed. Mabel had known them all. Not as cases, not as burdens, but as people, with habits, jokes, stubbornness, and small vanities. She knew who liked the crust cut off bread and who would be insulted by the suggestion. She knew who needed help and who needed help disguised as an accident. Elias read for nearly an hour. Juniper lay at his feet without sleeping. Every now and then she lifted her head when a page turned, as if the sound meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe those notebooks carried the rhythm of the woman who had fed her, sheltered her, and hidden a key beneath a rotten board. Elias looked down at the dog and felt the quiet absurdity of it all. He had thought he was rescuing a stray mother and 2 pups from a dirt road. In truth, Juniper had dragged him into a web of unfinished mercy. She had not come to his life empty-pawed. She had brought an inheritance with teeth marks on it. Then he found his own name, Elias Grant, Northfield Road, 66 soon, former military, broad shoulders, silver beard, walks like his knees argue but do not win, does not open door, leaves soup on left side of porch, not right because rain drips there, do not knock too long. The man does not hate people, he is punishing himself. Elias stopped breathing for a moment. The kitchen blurred not with dramatic tears, but with something worse. Recognition. He had been seen. Not watched, not judged, not pitied. Seen. Mabel had stood outside his closed door and understood more than he had allowed most people to know. She had known that his silence was not strength. She had known that grief had made a courtroom inside him, and he had appointed himself both judge and prisoner. Grace's name came to him then, gentle and devastating. His wife with dark hair, tired hands, and brave eyes. Grace had once told him near the end that love was not proved by doing every task perfectly. "Sit with me," she had said, "not beside me like a guard, with me." He had tried. Lord knew he had tried. But fear had made him useful instead of present. After she died, he had carried that failure like a medal made of lead. He looked again at Mabel's words. He is punishing himself. Juniper rose and pressed her nose against his knee. Elias placed one large hand on her head. Her fur was warm beneath his palm. "She knew you," he whispered. "And somehow she knew me too." The last notebook was thinner than the others. Its pages covered the week before Mabel died. Some entries were checked off, others were not.
3 names remained unfinished, each marked with a small circle instead of a check. Norman Pike needed firewood checked before the cold night. Edith Crane needed medicine picked up from Ruth Bell's counter. And Della Whitcomb at the end of Mill Road needed soup, soft bread, and a visit before Sunday. Beside Della's name, Mabel had written one more sentence. She will say she does not need company. Bring 2 cups anyway. Elias sat very still. The house was quiet except for the faint breathing of the puppies and the ticking of the stove clock. Then Juniper stood. She walked to the front door, not hurried, not frantic. She stopped there, turned her head toward Elias, and looked at him with the same patient severity she had carried since the first night. This time, Elias understood the direction before he even stood. Mill Road. Morning opened over Willow Creek with a gentle gray sky and the smell of wet grass rising from the fields. Elias Grant stood in his kitchen beside the stove, warming a pot of chicken soup he had made with more determination than skill. The result was edible, which, in his experience, placed it ahead of several military rations and at least 2 meals he had once cooked for Grace during their first year of marriage. On the table lay a loaf of soft bread from Harlow's Market, wrapped in brown paper, and beside it sat Mabel Hargrove's notebook, open to the unfinished list. Della Whitcomb, Mill Road, soup, soft bread. Bring 2 cups, anyway. Juniper stood near the door, ears lifted, her sable coat cleaner now, but still carrying the solemn patience of a creature who had waited too long for humans to understand simple things. The 2 German Shepherd puppies had been promoted from helpless bundles to small agents of disorder. The stronger one tried to climb into the empty bread basket and failed with great confidence. The smaller one sat under Elias's chair and watched the whole operation with the suspicious eyes of someone who believed soup might be alive. Elias packed the food into a canvas bag, then stared at the puppies. "You 2 are staying here." The stronger puppy sneezed directly into the basket. Juniper gave Elias one long look, then moved toward the puppies, touched each with her nose, and waited by the door again. Elias sighed. "Fine, but if anyone asks, this was your idea." He placed the puppies in an old wicker laundry basket padded with blankets and carried them to the truck. The basket had belonged to Grace. He had nearly thrown it out twice and failed both times. Now, as the puppies settled into it, one chewing the edge and the other blinking in the morning light, Elias felt the strange ache of objects finding new duties after grief had retired them. Juniper jumped into the truck beside the basket, calm and watchful, as if escorting a royal procession made mostly of paws and bad judgment. Mill Road ran along the eastern edge of town, with land dipped toward a narrow creek and the houses grew farther apart. Della Whitcomb's home sat at the very end, a small white cottage with peeling shutters, a sagging porch, and 2 blue mugs visible through the kitchen window. Della herself answered after Elias knocked too hard, because subtlety had never been one of his better weapons. She was 82, tall and thin as a winter branch, with pale skin, a long face, and white hair braided over one shoulder. Her back was straighter than her hip wanted it to be, and her blue eyes had the sharp brightness of someone who had lost much but refused to misplace her pride. She wore a faded green cardigan, buttoned wrong at the top, and held a wooden cane carved with tiny flowers. "If you're selling something," she said, "I'm too old to buy it and too stubborn to admit I need it." Elias cleared his throat. "Not selling. Soup." Della looked past him at Juniper, then at the laundry basket where the puppies were trying to look innocent and failing. "That is the strangest delivery service I've ever seen." "Still working out the business model," Elias said. He nearly spilled the soup on his own boot while stepping inside, which made Della laugh so suddenly that one of the puppies barked in alarm. Her kitchen was narrow and warm, with yellow curtains, a stove polished by habit, and shelves lined with jars of dried herbs. On the wall hung a black and white photograph of a tall man in a farm coat standing beside a younger Della, both of them smiling as if the camera had caught them mid-joke. Della noticed Elias looking. "Arthur," she said. "Gone 9 years.
Used to say I made coffee strong enough to clean tractor parts. Did it? Elias asked. Only the small ones. The answer came so dry and quick that Elias almost smiled before remembering he was not used to doing that in strangers' kitchens. He poured soup into a bowl, sliced the bread too thick, then too thin, then gave up and placed the whole loaf on the table. Della did not thank him immediately. Instead, she watched Juniper lie beneath the table, her body stretched where Mabel's boots might once have rested. The puppies curled in the basket by the stove, one already asleep, the other chewing a blanket corner with the seriousness of a lawyer examining evidence. Mabel used to sit there, Della said softly. She never asked if I was lonely. That woman had mercy enough not to make a person confess. Elias sat across from her. The 2 cups were already on the table. Neither of them mentioned it, which somehow made it matter more. By afternoon, word had begun moving through Willow Creek the way word moved in small towns. Faster than weather, slower than gossip only when gossip was tired. Ruth Bell told 3 people at Harlow's Market that Elias had found Mabel's notebooks. Norman Pike heard it while pretending not to listen near the feed store. Edith Crane cried into a handkerchief and then complained that nobody had told her sooner, though nobody had known sooner. By evening, Elias found himself standing in the town hall, a plain wooden building with fluorescent lights, folding chairs, and a faint smell of coffee that had given up on being coffee sometime around noon. He had not planned to speak. He had only come because Ruth called and said Cal Mercer had filed to remove the pickup from the old property the next morning, and if Elias wanted to stop it, he needed to ask the town council before paperwork became machinery. The council chair was Nora Finch, a woman in her early 60s with copper-gray hair cut at her jaw, narrow shoulders, and a calm face that made arguments lose confidence before reaching her desk. She had taught history at the high school for 30 years, and her voice still carried the gentle authority of someone who could silence a room without raising it. Cal Mercer sat near the aisle, in his work jacket, sandy hair thinning, arms crossed, looking less cruel than inconvenienced. Ruth Bell sat in the front row, round-faced and watchful behind her glasses. Della had come too, leaning on her flower-carved cane, wearing lipstick slightly crooked and dignity perfectly straight. Juniper sat beside Elias's chair, while the puppies occupied the laundry basket at his feet, like 2 small witnesses with poor courtroom manners. Elias stood when Nora called his name. His hands felt too large for the pages he had brought. He had written notes, but the first sentence vanished as soon as he saw the faces turned toward him. He could face gunfire, storms, broken machinery, and silence. A room full of neighbors waiting for him to speak was a different battlefield, and one he had avoided for years. "The truck," he began, then stopped. His throat tightened. Juniper rose and stepped closer, pressing her shoulder lightly against his leg. Elias looked down at her. The stronger puppy chose that exact moment to lean out of the basket and clamp its teeth around his shoelace. A ripple of laughter crossed the room. Even Cal Mercer looked down and snorted once, unwillingly. Elias bent, freed the lace, and said, "That dog has no respect for procedure." The laughter grew softer, warmer. Something in the room changed. The people were no longer staring at a retired SEAL making a statement. They were watching a man trying to do something tender without knowing where to put his hands. Elias lifted Mabel's notebook. He did not read every name. Some mercies deserved privacy. He only told them what the route had been. Soup, medicine, firewood, visits, reminders, 2 cups on tables where people claimed to need only one. He spoke of Mabel's truck not as a relic, but as a signpost. "Cal is right about one thing," he said, glancing at the salvage man. "It's old metal. It won't run again. But that truck carried more than food. It carried proof that people were still worth knocking for." His voice roughened, but he did not stop. "I found my name in her book. She wrote that I didn't hate people. She wrote that I was punishing myself." The room went very still. Elias looked at Ruth, at Della, at the floor, then back at the council. I used to think being left alone was peace, but sometimes being left alone is just the politest way to be forgotten. Silence followed. Not cold silence, not empty silence, the kind that settles when a room full of people has just heard something they had been avoiding in themselves. The next morning came bright over Willow Creek, as if the sky had decided the town had carried enough gray for 1 week. Sunlight spread over the fields, caught in the cottonwood leaves, and turned the old dirt roads the color of warm bread. Elias Grant stood outside the town hall with Mabel Hargrove's notebooks under one arm and Juniper sitting beside his boot. The German Shepherd mother looked calmer than she had since the first evening on the road, though her amber eyes still missed nothing. Her sable coat shone in the light now, brushed clean but still marked by the hard miles she had survived. Near the steps, the 2 puppies wrestled in the laundry basket, one biting the edge of the blanket, while the smaller one bravely attacked its own tail and lost. The town council had not made a grand announcement. Nora Finch, the calm former history teacher with copper-gray hair and a voice that could quiet a room without bruising it, simply stepped outside after the meeting and told Cal Mercer the truck would not be sold for scrap. Cal, narrow-faced and sun-browned in his faded work jacket, looked annoyed for half a minute, then tired, then almost relieved. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not polishing the thing." Ruth Bell, round-faced and sharp-eyed behind her glasses, patted his arm. "Nobody asked you to become sentimental, Cal. We're starting with basic decency. That'll be enough strain for one day." By noon, half of Willow Creek had gathered at the abandoned property north of Elias's house. They did not come like saints. They came like ordinary people, late, curious, carrying tools they might not know how to use, wearing hats against the sun, bringing opinions in generous supply. Norman Pike, the retired mechanic with grease-stained hands and white eyebrows like 2 stubborn caterpillars, directed the towing with the authority of a man who had not been asked, but had decided everyone needed saving from incompetence. Edith Crane arrived with a tin of biscuits, and tea so strong it could have frightened weather into behaving. Della Whitcomb came leaning on her flower-carved cane, tall and thin, her white braid pinned over one shoulder, her pride walking half a step ahead of her sore hip. The truck fought them at first. Its flat tires dragged. One wheel complained with a long metal shriek. Cal muttered that even dead vehicles had personalities, and this one was a mule with doors. Elias stood beside Juniper as the pickup was pulled from the tall grass, revealing the dark imprint it had left in the earth. For a strange moment, he felt as if they were not moving a truck, but lifting a memory that had been buried alive. They brought it to the green beside the community house, where children usually chased each other after church suppers, and older men argued about weather with the confidence of prophets. No one tried to make the pickup beautiful in the usual way. The rust stayed. The cracked windshield stayed. The faded blue paint stayed. Because the town slowly understood that the damage was part of the testimony. Ruth washed the door gently until the words "Mabel's Kitchen Route" could be read again. Nora arranged for a small wooden sign painted by a high school art student with a careful hand. "Mabel's Route. No one eats alone." Around the wheels, people planted wildflowers. Purple lupin, yellow blanket flowers, white yarrow, and small red poppies softened the metal edges. The pickup did not look new. It looked witnessed. It looked as though the earth, having taken one season to cover it, had now agreed to let it speak. Elias did not become a different man overnight. Life was rarely that polite. He still forgot bread one Tuesday and had to drive back to town while Juniper stared at him from the passenger seat with such disappointment that he apologized twice. He still knocked too loudly at Della's door. He still struggled to sit through long visits without reaching for a task to hide behind. But he went. That was the miracle, if there was one. Not thunder, not a blinding sign, just an old man getting into his truck with soup jars, soft bread, medicine reminders, and a dog who believed punctuality was a moral law. The puppies grew stronger with embarrassing speed. The bolder one became famous for escaping the laundry basket during a church supper and dragging a dinner roll beneath the piano. The smaller one, once weak and trembling, developed a regal habit of sitting on Elias's boot whenever strangers came too close. People began bringing blankets, dog food, jars, lists, and names. Some came because they wanted to help. Some came because they were lonely and could not yet say so. Mabel's route became less of a memory and more of a promise passed hand to hand. Elias began speaking of Grace differently. Not often, not easily, but truthfully. At Della's table, he told how Grace used to hum while folding towels badly, insisting that folding was a spiritual matter and therefore beyond criticism. At Ruth's market, he admitted Grace had once banned him from making pancakes after an incident involving smoke, a spatula, and what she called culinary combat. The stories hurt, but they also breathed. For years he had spoken of his wife only through the doorway of her illness and final days. Now he remembered the whole house of her life, the jokes, the impatience, the blue shawl, the way she had wanted him beside her, not standing guard over sorrow. One late afternoon, when summer had begun pressing warm hands over the fields, Elias sat on the bench near the old pickup. The wildflowers swayed around the wheels. The sign caught the light. Juniper lay at his feet, her head resting on her paws, no longer guarding a secret, but keeping company with a man who had finally learned to stay. The two puppies rolled in the grass nearby like small angels, recently convicted of stealing cookies. One had dirt on its nose. The other had the innocent expression of a creature planning further crimes. Elias rested his broad, weathered hand on Juniper's head. Her fur was warm beneath his palm. "I thought I saved you," he said quietly. Juniper lifted her amber eyes to him, calm and ancient in the way only a mother can seem ancient after surviving hunger, fear, and hope. In that stillness, Elias understood. Sometimes God did not answer with thunder. Sometimes mercy came on four paws, covered in dust, carrying two hungry puppies, and remembering the road back to where kindness had once lived. Elias thought mercy meant pulling a helpless life from the road. But the real miracle was quieter than that. It was a mother dog remembering where kindness had once lived, and an old man finally realizing he had been cared for even when he kept his door closed. Maybe that is how God often works in our daily lives. Not always through thunder, not always through answers we can explain, but through small interruptions. A knock we did not expect, a neighbor who leaves food, an animal that refuses to give up, a rusty old memory asking to be healed. This story reminds us that loneliness can become a habit, and pride can make love hard to recognize. But grace still finds cracks to enter. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Comment where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories like this, and may God bless you, protect your home, and remind you that you are never truly forgotten.